What's happening, everyone? Friedemann Findeisen here from Holistic Songwriting. Welcome to the 40th live Q&A of all time. So this is a special one. 40 hours that I've been doing this. This should be good. Let's go. Live! All right, so let's start with some banter until the chat fills up and you guys get to ask me some questions. If you have any questions, feel free to write them at any time. I'm just gonna blabber on about some stuff that has been happening this week. So I've visited Berlin this week, which was pretty cool. It was pretty amazing. I did a meet and greet there, and these meet and greets frequently turn into, I wouldn't say workshops because we're not writing songs together or anything like that, but it's just, I'm just always hoarse after them. And shout out to Kashmir and Heiko here. I had a great time. It was really a blast. And Kashmir, if you're listening to this, I sent over your tracks to the producer, and we'll see what happens. All right. So yeah, let's see if that turns into something. Also, I met Alexander Freund there, who's a friend of mine. Really great producer. He's if you're German, you might know the band Silbermond. He's the producer of them. And we have some podcasts planned together, or one podcast for now, and maybe turn that into a series in the future. We'll see how that goes. But he's fantastic. It's always a blast talking to him. He's very analytical mind when it comes to pop music as well, especially for the German market, obviously, because that's where he operates in. But it's always fascinating to talk to him, and he always pulls out some spreadsheets when I'm there. And I love that. That's exactly how I like to work. And, basing your stuff on data is, I think, always preferable to just, I don't know. So that was really great. Also, you may have noticed that Patreon is not online quite yet. I'm not sure if I can make it this week. All I really need is a banner and a little bit of balls, because, to be honest, it's taking me. It is scary to start with something like Patreon. It's weird because I've been doing these live Q&As every week anyways, and nothing really would change except that it would be paid. But I think I'm a little afraid of the idea that maybe I'll be doing live Q&As and there's only going to be 2 or 3 people in those asking questions, and so that could run out of steam very quickly. So I guess that's what I'm afraid of. But we'll see how it goes. I think there's no way around it. And you may have noticed that this Q&A is called Love and Fear. And that is because that is something that I've really been thinking about a lot this last week. Because I was wondering, the only thing I really need for the Patreon to get started is really just a banner. That's the only thing that I need. Everything else I've already set up. And, why I'm not doing that? I could make a banner in like half an hour. Wouldn't be a problem. Or maybe an hour, I think the reason is, it is that I'm just afraid. And so I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I've been reading up on it a little bit, read some books, heard an interview today about it, and I think so. The gist of it, I think, is that in life we kind of make decisions for two reasons, right? We make decisions based on love or fear, and I think mostly we make decisions based on fear. Mostly we don't do stuff because of fear. We don't upload that video to YouTube out of fear that it's going to get criticized. We don't show that song to an important producer because we are afraid that they're going to tell us that the song isn't good enough. We don't call that agent. We don't call that label or whatever. We don't send our songs to that record company because we're afraid that we're going to get turned down. We're afraid of so many things, and that's why we don't do a lot of things. And, I'm afraid that the channel isn't going to do so hot, which is why I'm not releasing my Patreon account for some reason, which I know is ridiculous, but still, it's still a very real fear in my life. And so what has kind of kept me together today is this idea that when we make a decision, it really comes down to 2 things. Are we making a decision based on fear or love? And for the last couple of weeks, I've tried this experiment. I urge you to do this as well. I think it's worked really well for me, is to replace the word work with love. So instead of saying, this needs more work, whenever I'm giving feedback to something, or when, for example, when I'm working on a project, we're not saying like, oh yeah, this is just going to be so much more work. No, what I'm starting to say is, this needs more love. This needs this needs a little bit more love before it will work. And what I think that does, and I really like that phrase, first of all, because it implies that this doesn't have to be stressful, tense kind of situation where you just have many sleepless nights, even though that might happen as well. But it implies that, no, this is every piece of art that you put out there, and this includes my Patreon account in this case, needs love. It needs someone who puts a lot of thought into it to make it something special, something that they care about, so that the people who will then experience this piece of art will be able to see that someone put a lot of care and love into that project. And this goes for heavy metal just as much as for folk music. Love doesn't mean it has to be, colorful, rainbow, and talking about unicorns. Not that folk is all about that, but more so than heavy metal at least. Even though there's quite a bit of comedy metal bands. Anyways, you get the point. So I think acting from love is obviously the preferable choice here. And I wonder if it's possible to maybe limit the amount of actions you take that are inspired by fear. And if you maybe could increase the choices you take out of love in your life. And that's something I've been thinking about quite a lot the last couple of days. Because I think it really would change, and to a certain extent I already feel it has in the last couple of days, the way we look at work, the way we look at our lives, because it is so easy to fall into a rut with what you're doing. And obviously being a musician is the best job in the world, but it doesn't feel like that almost 90% of the time. 90% of the time is the daily grind, and then 10% is the fun stuff where you actually get to write some music. And so I think that's the gist of it, really. I mean, I'm trying to say this in different ways, but really that's what it comes down to. Is that's my goal. I mean, that's how far I am right now. It's not really that I have this finished theory here. That's really the only thing I have, is understanding that every decision that you make comes either down to fear or love, and that it is a decision. Even not doing something is obviously a decision, but taking control of those decisions, understanding the difference, and then making sure that we don't act out of fear, because fear really very rarely helps us. It used to help us when we were cavemen, but I think today it doesn't really make sense to be afraid of anything, really. Nothing that has to do with being a musician, at least. Okay, so let's look into the chat, because I'm sure we have a couple of people here. 12 people watching right now. So we have Martin here. Salute. How's it going? Anderson the Fourth, Beatmaster Moreno is back. Kai Ellis, so excited for this Q&A. Cinzia Ruoka, is that how you pronounce it? We have Yukatal Tifitz, whose name I forgot. Sorry. What's your real name again? Or do you have a more pronounceable name? John JK04 says, made it. Great. Good to see you, dude. And then here we go. Anderson says, I don't know if I can attend the live streams when the school year comes around. Is it too late to purchase the EP release feedback package? Oh, that's a good question. I would say yes. So I'm actually going to cap the feedback stuff, and I'm really going to bring that into Patreon. So since I'm doing those paid now, that's something that we maybe can talk about, that I could be doing them in more convenient times for you guys. Since I know most of my fans, students, whatever you want to call it, and I never know quite what you call you guys, are overseas, I might have to find a better time slot, because Monday 6 p.m. is good for me, but I understand it's not great for a lot of you guys, because it's like 9 a.m. in the morning on a Monday, which is when most people have to work. So that's something I'm gonna change for the Patreon account, and yeah, I urge you to take your songs to the Patreon account and try that. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be the same quality, maybe just condensed in time a little bit. Jordan Crow says, just a quick question. What does the musical profiling you do consist of? So my musical profiling work, it's taken different shapes and forms in the past. What I do most of the time is that people send me, and this is mostly like, so Alexander Freund, for example, the producer that I'm talking to on a podcast and that I just visited in Berlin. So it's producers like that who occasionally send me an artist's image that might contain a PDF. So in this case, the last case, that was a PDF, a SoundCloud page with a couple of secret locked links to listen to some music. And I think that's it. Sometimes I get some music videos before they're released. Sometimes I just get a really short written statement of what the band is about. Sometimes it's demos. Most of the time it's a fairly finished act because that's when I can help the most. That's what I always tell people. If you can send me something that is... It doesn't have to be done, but it should really show where you want to go with the whole thing. Even if, for example, you don't have to take pictures yourself. If you find some pictures online that show what you want to do visually, and you find some, you've produced like one song that already sounds just the way that you want it to sound, that's perfect. And what I do then with that kind of stuff is I say, first of all, what I think about it, how it speaks to me emotionally, which is, I think, a big part of it. And I explain why I think it's making me feel a certain way, what I think its options are in the market, where I think some Fallkeulen, what's that in English? Like hidden traps, what some potential problems might be when you release something like this, or when you're trying to market something like that. Maybe suggest some platforms where this kind of music would work. And I basically, mostly I just find things that annoy me, things that don't quite work for me, trying to tear at the seams and see if the whole thing comes loose, like by finding, saying like, what I do quite often is saying like, your logo doesn't fit, like the artwork of this, the font isn't right, or the text here, your bio doesn't quite work with whatever you're trying to sell me, or the music here, this song here doesn't fit, try this direction with it, or stuff like that, so it's a holistic package. I'm really looking at everything that the artist is doing and trying to give a holistic feedback to that person, saying like, here's what I think you are, here's your personality based on everything that I'm seeing and hearing and experiencing, and here's how I think you could do that better. So that was a very long answer to something that you called a quick question, but there you go. Kai says, last week you ran out of time to talk about writing intro songs for YouTube videos. Can we hear more about it today? Sure. So with intro songs, I actually forgot what I said last week. I was really tired last week, and by the way, I'm really tired as well today. I went to sleep at 3:30 this morning, and same Saturday night, and I've just been dreaming about music the entire time. So, and I mean like 3:30 in the morning. So that's when I stopped working. So it's been a pretty crazy weekend, and this week doesn't look very much better. I'm actually on my way to Stuttgart and then Wiesbaden and then back to Nordhorn. It's going to be a pretty crazy week. So I've actually totally forgotten what I said last week. So maybe I'm going to start over, which is maybe a good thing because some of you might not have seen last week's video. So intro songs. I think, first of all, they have to be short. That's kind of my main concern with intro videos. Like I see so many intro videos on YouTube that are like 30 seconds long or sometimes a minute and 15 seconds. I've seen that. It's crazy. Where people have like these elaborate intros, and it's very clearly just something that they found on like a template page and they just paste it in their logo, and it's way too long. And I do that sometimes. I go on websites and I find those templates and put in my logo, but typically I speed it up because I don't want my intro to be any longer than like 10 seconds maximum. Like 10 seconds is the absolute maximum. If it were like a more complicated show where I would want to explain what the show is about, then it might be as long as 15-20 seconds. But if it's really just like a header, like a pre-roll for an actual video series, like pulling the lever, it just says pulling the lever, there's a little animation so it looks nice, and then we go straight into the episode. What I think works really nice is having a little bit of pre-roll. As you saw, like if you look at the latest episode of Pulling the Lever, which is episode 5, I think, it's called Does Skill Equal Success? ? That's what the video is called. Equal is like the sign, not the spelled out word. If you want to look for it in the future, there, you can hear me talking in the very beginning. I think I say like 1 or 2 sentences, and then before the actual intro starts, we already hear a little bit of music. And I did the same thing for the hit song Architect, where we have a couple of seconds of pre-roll that kind of overlaps with my talking, with my little introduction. Then it goes into that video, and then you have a little bit of ring out as the animation is over, but we still hear the music in the background as I already start talking. And I think that's really nice because it allows you to integrate it into your videos a little bit nicer, or whoever's video. I mean, you might be writing intro music for someone else. But integration, I think, is a big part of it. You want it to smoothly come in and smoothly go out. And typically we do that by kind of fading it in and bringing it back out, right? We don't want to... another way to do it is to go in with a bang, to just like start the intro and animation with like a crash on the one or something like that, or having a big moment there. That's also possible, but it has to be one of those two. Like anything else doesn't really work. Like it has to be very closely. And the second thing that I would say is it has to be very closely tied to the animation. So a big part of what I do is I make sure that, first of all, the phrasing of the music, and it's typically just one melody, is going to phrase well with the picture. And then the last step is I also do a lot of sound effects for the picture. So for example, with pulling the lever, you hear me pulling down the lever, and you hear like the lights coming on and stuff like that. And you hear the hum of the light, even though it's very low in the mix, but you can still hear all of that stuff. And I think it contributes to that experience that you're actually hearing a lever being pulled when it's actually just a GIF in After Effects. So yeah, I think that's about it. In terms of the composition, it's really nothing too complicated. It really is sound design. It doesn't feel really like composition. And that's, I think, an important part. If you're trying to write music here, it's going to get too long, first of all, and you're really not going to make yourself happy. What I do typically is just the first thing that pops into my head is usually what I put into the thing. Like I have one melody, like whatever, and then okay, so let's just figure out what those notes are for that, and then I build the track around that, right? A little bit of sound design here and there, and it's usually done. Like it's not really that complicated in terms of the composition. The tricky part is really the sound design, figuring out which sounds to use so that it fits the show, both visually and in terms of the sound, and making sure that it's over quick enough so that the melodies aren't too drawn out and stuff like that. All right. Moreno says fear is excitement. It can be. There are good forms of fear for sure, like being a little bit nervous before a gig certainly might be a good thing. But there's also a certain form of stress where if you're stressed because of fear, that's certainly not a good thing. And what lately I've been trying to do is whenever I feel like, oh man, there's so much work that I still have to do, and I'm under so much pressure and there's so much stress, and I have to finish a big project until tonight, and I barely have started yet, and I'm a little tense about it, The first thing I do now is, and that's what I'm teaching myself at the moment, is take a breath, maybe have a tea, and then do something that really relaxes me instead of getting to work, which is what I used to do, just getting to work and being really stressed about it. I think it's more important to control yourself first, get in touch with your body a little bit, if you want to call it that. So just to relax yourself, because I think stress is never helpful. It really never is. If you can relax yourself before you work, you're always going to do a better job than if you're super stressed than working, right? Because if you're stressed, again, you're acting out of fear, and you don't want to act out of fear, you want to act out of love. Everything that you're doing should happen because you want it to happen. You want to create something great, not something that sounds like you're tense, that or something that sounds like you wanted to please someone or something like that. All right. Kai says, just reading Anderson's question. Anderson's question was about the release feedback, the feedback package. Did the option to pay you to review songs outside of Patreon go away? This is what I get for missing the first half of the Q&A last week. Yeah, so this is something that I'm seriously thinking about. And yeah, let's make this official right now. I want to really stop with the feedback service on my website and really transport that into Patreon. Make that a little bit of a of a more public thing, so people can send in songs through Patreon, and I will review them on Patreon in a live video like this. Basically, I'll be listening to the videos in videos like this and giving my feedback as we go. Yeah, because that makes things a lot easier for me. And the most important thing about it is, I think everyone gets to learn from the little mistakes that you've made, you know. And it's also great to hear someone else's songs, to figure out you're not the only one that's making mistakes, and to listen to other people's songs and say, like, you know, this doesn't work. Why doesn't that work? For me, it's because X, Y, and Z. And you figure out things about your own writing by listening to other people's mistakes. And this is actually, I've said this a number of times already, but this is probably the biggest thing I got from conservatory, studying music, was to be able to listen to bad songs. I think that was one of the greatest things in my life, because it really allowed me to learn from other people's mistakes. And I think a lot of people, when they hear a bad song, they write it off, they laugh about it, and they don't really give it much thought. I'm really the opposite. When I hear a bad song, I'm like, my mind starts racing, and I'm really interested in why it doesn't work. And so I've analyzed, properly analyzed some of the biggest shit songs on YouTube, like Rebecca Black's Friday and those kind of songs. I'm really fascinated by those, because, you know, a lot of things were done right here, but why is this considered really, really bad? I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And especially like learning from my colleagues in conservatory was really cool, because they were all great musicians. They had great ears. They had their heart in the right place. They wanted to study music. You know, they're good guys, but something went wrong along the way. And I always tried to figure out what that was. And so I didn't fall into that trap myself. All right. Okay. Jordan says, your honesty is much appreciated and it makes total sense. There should be no stress. This is only about giving us options to show you some love. All right. Fair enough. Very nice comment, by the way. Thank you very much. Plastic's Mind says, Donnie Darko movie, Fear and Love. Was there a bit about Fear and Love in Donnie Darko? It's been a while since I've seen it. I think I've watched it like 3 or 4 times because I really like that movie. But man, it's so all over the place. There's so many things and ideas in that movie. It's just one of my favorite stories is this. I think it's a Native American story about the 2 wolves, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, where you say like there's these 2 wolves. One of them only consumes fear. The other one only consumes love. And the question to the person telling the story is, well, which one will win? And the person says, the one you feed, of course. And I think it's a really smart story, and it's something, again, that's popped up over and over again this week. Martin says, hey, I've been in Geneva last week and worked on some songs with cool people. I learned a lot and recommend everyone to work with other musicians often. Are you more into working alone or with others? I'm good with both. It really depends on the people. If it's the right people, I love working in teams. But I'm also kind of a solitary person, and I love writing by myself as well. But it's fine. Like I love working with other people because I write so much by myself. You know, like 70% of my writing, or maybe 80, yeah, maybe more like 70% of my writing is done alone. So I really appreciate it if someone else is there and we can bounce ideas off each other. So since if that were to tilt to like 30-70, where only 30% I would be spending writing by myself, I think I wouldn't really enjoy that anymore. But if it's just like a small percentage of the whole writing process, I think it's great, and I really enjoy it, especially if the people are nice and friendly. And I had some really nice experiences with producers and writers in the past. And just like last month, we had a producer over, and it was just fantastic. And it really inspires you to see someone who really loves their job, you know, and it makes you want to write better songs as well. Tillis says, very good opening statement. Thank you very much. Our generation has a very new and improved definition of what work means. Yeah, that's very true. We're very lucky to be able to say that that work can be something that we love. You know, if you look at the generation of our parents or of our grandparents, they didn't have that option, you know, because, you know, our grandparents grew up in wars, and you know, doing what you love wasn't always on the menu that day. So you had to pretty much make a living somehow. That was the most important thing. And we're very fortunate, of course, here in the Western world to be able to do what we love and even have a good living that way. It's pretty crazy, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Cynthia Roko says, how can I get work as a songwriter? I've stage recording fright, so I can't perform my music, and I'm just a beginner as producer. What sector of the music industry should I have to contact, and how? Well, there's a bunch of channels that you could use. Something that's worked for some people. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had a producer here who called himself an introvert. He said, like, I'm not really a very social person, and I like working by myself and that kind of thing. He was a great guy, by the way. Like, we didn't notice anything or anything, but like, he, it's up to everyone to decide that for themselves. And he said, like, I get most of my jobs through Facebook, and so he's in a couple of Facebook groups where he posted some of his songs. He did like some making of videos. I think he just filmed his screen while he was playing some tracks with a camera, with his cell phone. And people wrote him and said, like, hey, I really like your stuff. I really like your style. Should we work together? And that's how he makes a living right now. So it's totally possible to make a living through Facebook, which I didn't think was possible, but he says it totally is. And I believe him. So that's one way of doing it. If you don't want to perform in public, it's just, let the music speak for itself. And that's also what I told him on the way home. I said, the thing is, in this industry, it does, we tend to think it's so important to be extroverted and to be like outgoing and talking to people and connecting and networking with people. And, that might be true for some people. But at the end of the day, if you do great work, people will want to work with you. That's just kind of how it is. And we get that. Not everyone has to be an extrovert. Like, I love working with introverts. I think introverts are really great people. They're often way smarter than extroverts. And it's just, I think it's usually a very good working relationship, because it's not, we're very rarely fighting in those kind of situations. It's more, we're just talking about stuff. And if the climate is good, the creative climate, and we can just voice our opinions when we want, and no one feels hurt, and it's just creative, like stacking on top of each other, that's a fantastic thing. And I don't care if you're an introvert or extrovert. If you're like, as long as you're comfortable around me, if I can sit with you in the same room while we write, and we're just being good people together and being nice to one another while we give each other feedback, that's a great thing, And I don't care if you're good in great masses of people. If you could hold a workshop in front of 1,000 people, I don't care about that. That's not the job. The job is sitting in front of your computer and doing some great work. And if you're doing that, I don't care. So, right. But going back to your question, another way to that you could consider would be writing for sound libraries. There's a bunch of libraries not just a bunch, like a lot of them. There's a bunch of libraries on the internet for example, filmmakers that need music for a documentary or, TV spot or radio show, whatever, or for their podcast. And they're willing to pay you quite a good bit for downloading or you being able to use one of your songs legally. And you might get royalties for that. You might just get the licensing fee. But it can be pretty good money if you have a lot of songs on there. And I mean, this is a long project. Like, this could be your main job, just writing pieces of music for sites like that. But I know a couple of people who make a really, really good living that way, because I have someone who writes about 1,000 songs or 1,000 pieces of music a year, and that includes different versions of the same song. So he'll usually not just send in one version of a song, but one without drums, one without vocals, etc., and different combinations of songs. But he uploads 1,000 pieces of music to sites like that, and he makes a great living from that. So he just writes every day. He writes the music that he wants to write. He has no boss. No one tells him what to do. He just makes the music that he wants to make. And he's just making his living off of selling those. Like, he's selling certain tracks like 1,000 times a year, or more, because these sites aren't exclusive. So you're not buying the license for those songs typically. You're just buying the license to use it once in whatever project you're using. And so you can sell the same project over and over again for very little money, granted, but that stacks up and he can make a great living from that. So that's another way to do it. Finding a publisher as a songwriter is certainly a good step if you can find one. But the first things that you have to work on is obviously making a great portfolio. Again, shit doesn't fly in this industry, and it's getting better and better. I think it's getting harder and harder to write music that sucks and promote, like just pushing a lot of money down your throat and telling you to like it. That is really going away, through the internet, through the socialization of the internet, through Spotify and those kind of like-based advertising systems where, for example, Spotify is based on a playlist system, right? The more people put a song in a playlist, the higher up it's going to be pushed in other people's playlists. So if people like something, if you did a great job, if you wrote a song that is really likable, that's going to fly. If you write something that you just wrote for cash flow, it won't, right? So at the end of the day, just make great music. That's the most important thing. And once you have a great portfolio, then it's a good place to contact an agency. Or if you want to go down the other road, as I said, you can just start sending in your songs to library sites. Moreno says, I feel like love is energy, so the idea of objectives needing love is swell. But hey, production is sort of feeling like building a body through sound. What do you say? This is actually an email that you sent me, right? Yeah, I think you're right. There's certainly something to that. And I really like the idea of saying love is energy. So if we put energy into a project, it's gonna burst with, it's gonna tremble with energy, and that's something that people can feel. And I really do believe that is true. Even if you get a CD from a store, and you can tell from the way the booklet was designed that someone put a lot of love into it, that really has that creates a certain kind of spark. I remember like going through the booklet of I think it was like the what was that called? Hybrid Theory, that like the really big breakout album by Linkin Park. I remember going through that booklet over and over again as a kid. I was really fascinated by it because there was so much love put into that booklet. So many drawings, so many interesting logos like that. I think the rapper Mike Shinoda put a lot of time. Like I think he's the guy who created all the artwork for it, if I'm not mistaken. But so much time went into that booklet. Someone really put a lot of work into it, and I was really fascinated by it. I think it was a big part back in the day because why I fell in love with that band. Back then, internet wasn't such a big thing, and you took all the information you could get about a band, and in that case, it was just from the booklet. So, and the same thing goes for music videos as well. I just watched. I'm a big fan of Sigrid, the Norwegian singer. That's Sigrid, and her videos I think are made with a lot of love, and the way she moves in those videos, the way she sings, I think it all fits together really, really well. And you can tell that this is not a project that someone is doing for money. You can tell that this was made with love, and that's how she actually is. You can see it in interviews as well. Like, this is her personality, and it comes through the music really well. Okay. Plastic Spine says, I think love is a positive emotion, fear is a negative but helpful emotion. But reason should be used for decisions. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And again, fear doesn't necessarily have to be helpful. There is positive fear for sure. But maybe we should use the word stress instead of fear. If we feel that the fear that we're making the decision out of causes stress, then maybe it's not a good decision to take overall. But if it's helping us in some way, like making us more excited for something, like for taking a gig, or if maybe we're just afraid of a really big opportunity and it's a crazy big thing, then it can be a very positive thing as well. But that creates positive stress. Like, I get really amped up about those kind of things. I get really excited about it. And I actually have a couple of projects right now that are running that I'm super stoked about. And if those get realized, I'd be just crazy happy. So I don't know what's going to happen with those, but there's some really big opportunities lying bare right now for me. So I'm super excited. Hope to share it with you guys very soon. All right. John JKO4 says, when I get a progression or rhythm going, I struggle with coming up with a vocal melody. I've thought about trying to use another instrument to create a melody, then removing it and singing the melody in place of that instrument. Do you know of anyone that does that or has had success doing that? Thanks again for your help. Personally, I don't do it that way. And I do honestly everything in songwriting. Like, I'm my creative process is really hard to pin down because I do take a different approach every single time. However, one thing I almost never do, or never do, if it's for instrumental music, I will do it with an instrument. But if you're talking about a literal melody, something that a vocal will sing, right? I never do it with an instrument unless it's like a saxophone or flute or something like that. Didgeridoo, anything that needs breath, really. So I really don't like writing melodies on guitar because what I found is the second I go to my guitar, I start doodling, and you come up with these licks that work really well for guitar, but very, very rarely do those translate well to the human voice. And the big reason for that is simply breath and words, right? When you sing, you have to actually use words, and those tend to not go so well with guitar licks because words have certain stresses, certain syllables that have to be stressed, and that's not something that we have on the guitar. So it's possible to write a melody on guitar and then write a text to that, but it's very difficult. And you can always hear that it wasn't written for the vocals. So a really good example of this from the jazz world is is that Joni Mitchell? Let me check that out again. My analyst told me that was right out of my head. Twisted by Joni Mitchell, is it? Yeah, Joni Mitchell, Twisted. That's what the song is called. So that is clearly a song that was written for an instrument, I think. Was it saxophone or trumpet or something like that? Clear jazz standard, like a sort of from the bebop era, but one of my favorites. Like, I'm not a big fan of bebop music in general, but this is one of my favorites for sure. It's like so weird and twisted, like as the title says, so it fits really well. But the way those lyrics sound, you can totally tell that wasn't ever meant to be sung by a vocalist. And she even she even wrote some lyrics to a saxophone solo later on, which is totally bonkers. It's super, super cool. But you can really tell that it wasn't written for vocals. It's so over the top. So personally, I never do it like that. The big rule on this channel has always been whatever works for you is great. And if it works for you, keep doing it. If you want my advice, if you want to write more like me or more like the charts, in my opinion, I think that's how the charts get those kind of melodies. Sing your melodies. Even if you're not a singer, start singing. And I have a lot of producers here that coach vocalists in my studio, and they really can sing. They're horrible singers. I mean, sometimes they're just whistling or they're just, they're singing like this, and it's horrible. But it's still good enough. It's still good enough. That's fine. As long as you can say words, you can sing good enough to be able to write melodies. As long as you have a singer in the studio who can eventually turn your horrible singing into something that actually sounds good, of course. Granted. But it's all about the rhythm. It's all about the words. It's all about when you take a breath. All of that stuff you can't really replicate on an instrument. So I highly recommend you don't do that. But if it works for you, again, that's the big rule, then never mind my advice. Beatmaster says, fear keeps you alive, but what is life without love? Very nicely said. Kai says, what factors do you think go into making a song sound triumphant or heroic? Triumphant or heroic. I think big, bold instruments tend to sound very heroic. Like in general, like, trumpets, brass is just a very heroic kind of sound. So that's something I would put into almost any song that I really want to sound heroic or triumphant. Big, roomy sounds. So if we're talking about the production, using certain kind of reverbs that sound like a big hall or a stadium or something like that. Anything that kind of reminds you of gladiators, fanfares, that kind of thing, Any way you can emulate that space, that Greek sort of classic heroic drama kind of thing, right? If you can put any things in your music that remind the listener of those kind of images, that's typically good, I would say. So, and that's why the trumpets, that's why the large stadium kind of sound. Generally, in terms of the chords and melodies, you want to stay away from too complicated stuff. You want, typically that means major keys. Although if obviously you can be tragically heroic, like if you kill yourself for the greater good of, or whatever that might be. In that case, the trumpets will have to carry that mostly, and you write some sad chords. But in general, triumphant, positive heroism will need major chords, and usually sticks to just major chords as well. And in terms of the trumpets or the melodies that you're going to write, that's typically going to revolve around the first couple of steps of the overtone series. So that means root, octave, fifth, root, and then major third, fifth, and then it goes into smaller steps. Actually, I forgot the 2 in there, but whatever. So what that means is when the first trumpets, the first brass instruments that were created, didn't have any valves, so they just had, it was just one long horn essentially. And the way you had to create different notes on that horn was by overblowing and by moving your lips and by using different types of lip tension. If you ever blown on a bottle to create a pitch, you might know that it's possible to create different pitches depending on how hard you blow and where exactly you blow. That's essentially what a trumpet player still does, and what they had to do before we invented valves. So modern trumpet players still use lip tension and all that stuff for sure to jump up different octaves and stuff like that. But because they have the valves, that helps them a little bit with that, and it's not the only thing that they have to be good at. Back in the day, that was all trumpet playing was, really, is being able to control your lip tension so well. And that's why all these old pieces that we hear from those times, like dum 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 dum, are I think I might be mistaken about this one, but it's like these typical, it's the 5-1 5-1 5-1 5-1 3-1-5. So yeah, so that's just the overtone series, right? There's no notes in there, like no complicated notes. There's no sharp 4, there's no flat 6. That's because it doesn't use it. You physically couldn't play those notes. That's why all these old melodies you hear written for those instruments are so simple. It's usually 5s, 1s, maybe 3rds. That's kind of it, right? And so if you want to write a heroic melody, that's the kind of melodies that you're going to be writing. And also, I would recommend you listen to some scores. Alan Menken, is that his name? Alan Menken? Jesus, Alan Menken. That's him, right? Alan Menken? Yeah, that's him. Wrote a fantastic score for Hercules. That sounds very heroic, very triumphant, fantastic. And wrote another for The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which is also fantastic. Very close, actually, in terms of the melodic material, but both really great scores, very heroic. And obviously goes more into the orchestral direction, but definitely good scores to listen to in terms of the melodic and harmonic material. Murad says, love your channel. How do you avoid copyright problems since there's so much music already made? Thank you. I don't think about that, honestly. The way the music industry is right now is if your song is successful enough, you are going to get sued and you will probably lose. Because ever since Blurred Lines, which has become, what's the word for that again? Ever since that, the descendants of Marvin Gaye won that trial by saying, our song, the Blurred Lines, evokes the same emotions. It's based on the same feeling as this groove by Marvin Gaye, and they came through with that. They won that case. It's a precedence case, whatever you call it in English. I don't know. Präzedenzfall in German. Let me check that out. Präzedenzfall. It's a leading case, creative precedence. I don't know. Precedential case. Original precedent. I'm not sure which one of these it is. It's a precedent. I don't know. So, and that has led to a sort of myriad of lawsuits over the last couple of years, and people have been being sued left and right. I don't think there's anything you really can do to protect yourself. You could, from the very beginning, say this was written inspired by this and that person, and give that person a little bit of credit in terms of royalties. That's what some people do, or you wait with that until you've lost your trial, and then you have to do that anyways. It's a complicated thing, and honestly, if you're a small nobody, like you probably are, sorry, but that's, I think, what most songwriters in this world are. I don't think it's really something you have to worry about, so just make music that you think is great, you know? As long as you don't willingly steal something, I think you'll be fine. Honestly, and I know this sounds like bad advice. If I was a lawyer, I'd probably give you a much longer answer here and tell you like, oh, you can do this and you can't do that, whatever. Honestly, the reality of the situation is musicians don't really think about that. Unless we're like, you don't want to willingly steal something, obviously, but if you're not doing that, really don't worry about it too much. If your song gets a #1 hit and you make millions with it, expect to get sued. That's just how it is. Just put a little bit aside for the eventual lawsuit. Plastic Spine says, at John, watch piano covers of pop songs on YouTube. It's amazing how simple the catchy vocal melodies are. So these are about melody writing. Thomas says, John, I had the same issue until I just focused on top lining and writing vocal melodies over music. I found my concentrated effort allowed my melody writing to soar and get much better. All good tips. Cynthia Ruoko says, I saw your SoundCloud page and there's a lot of short clips of music. What's their use for? Do you register that mini songs to the GEMA? Those short clips are really just demos So I send out demos to a bunch of different people. Sometimes if people are asking for a show reel or something like that, that's what I send them, just so they get an impression of all the different things that I do in a very short amount of time. And the original songs that those short clips stem from are registered to the GEMA, which is the German ASCAP or BMI, whatever you want to call it. It's a PRI. So they are registered, and the use is, sending it to artists, other songwriters, to producers, whatever I need them for. It's really just my virtual business card in terms of my music making. Hey, Clement. Jordan Crow says, at John JKO4, I should clarify, when I use that technique, I use it to kind of flesh out the song's energy curve, and I often use synth choirs. I couldn't write that way on guitar, etc. So this was in response to the melody writing as well, if I'm not mistaken. Beatmaster says, thoughts on Aretha Franklin and her influence on pop? No. Sorry. It's not my specialty. I haven't listened to her music enough, to be honest, to really give a well-balanced opinion here, I think. I mean, I know her songs, obviously, and I think I watched a couple of documentaries on her, but I don't think I have anything really interesting to add here. John JKO4 says, thank you. I can sing other songs great, but trying to come up with my own is just sometimes something I struggle with. Oh, yeah, it's something you're going to get better at, though. Try to really what I often do is when I'm trying to figure out melodies is really get into the groove of the song, and just really I just start singing. I really don't think about what I'm singing. I record myself if I ever find something good. Some people also like to record everything that they're singing and go through it later. I like to find something, and when I've figured something out, I play with that until I have something that kind of feels half done. Then I record that and do something else, come back to it, etc. But yeah, it's just something you have to do intuitively, and you're going to get better at that as well. And try out different things. Something I tell students that have problems with coming up with different ideas for songs is to go through the different intervals. So if you have a song that is set in C major, you try a melody on C, then you try a melody on D and E on F, etc. And you can go wherever you want to after that. I always start with a kind of one-note melody, and then I go through it again, trying out something else, just starting with that note. And that often helps. And I've come up with some pretty interesting melodies that way. And because it's nice as well, going away from just the regular intervals you always use, like the 1, 3, and 5. Trying out something like a 6, which I almost never use, but sometimes it works really well, can be really interesting and creates a whole different dimension to your writing. All right, Sonic Charmlab says, really dig Secret 2. I'm planning on using the structure of Strangers since it's such a great example of an addiction formula song. Yeah, I really love Strangers. I actually just listened to it half an hour ago. showing it to my girlfriend. Strangers is great. High Five, I think, is also really interesting. Maybe not as catchy as Strangers, but still a really fantastic song. And I love the lyrics for it as well. I really love her to bits. I just saw like a live video of her that she did, just doing her like 3 songs. I think it was Raw, Strangers, and High Five. Just acoustically, just piano and, you know, background vocals. Fantastic. Like, she's incredible. Where did she come from? Like, she's such a fantastic singer. That performance was just absolutely incredible. It was just so on point. And I've seen some older stuff of hers. It's still, you can still find it, like from 2012. There's still some stuff floating around on the internet where she's just singing with a friend on playing guitar, and it's good. It's all right. But compared to today, and I mean, it's obviously 6 years later, but her voice has improved so much, and her timing has improved so much. It's really crazy. So, yeah. Precedent. Yeah, precedents. I mean, there's different ways of saying it, probably. Okay, here we go. Thomas says, is it better to be a jack of all trades or a specialist in the pop world as a songwriter? It really depends on where you're writing. Typically, it's better to be a specialist, but then be a specialist for something, for a niche kind of genre. That's kind of the best way to do it. If you're an artist, however, if you're a songwriter, I think being able, like having, you should still have a specialty, but you obviously need to be much broader there. So, for example, if you're an artist, you're not a pop writer. You're writing a very specific kind of pop that sounds like this, that has those kind of chords, that has those kind of melodies, that has this kind of image, this kind of lifestyle attached to it, right? So it's this, really, right? If you're a songwriter, what you want is this. This is what pop is. Because pop can be a lot of different things. Even if you add in a guitar, that's still pop, you know, if you write it a certain way. Or if you write rock music, which doesn't happen a lot in the songwriting world, because most rock acts write their music themselves, then it wouldn't just be like hardcore or, you know, or metal or rap or whatever, rap rock or whatever. It would be that whole genre of rock. So you'd have to be pretty proficient in almost everything. Let's see. Thomas says, what's up with this Music Modernization Act talk? Music Modernization Act, is that something I've missed in the papers? Is one step closer to fixing music copyright. I haven't seen this yet. This is probably because it's an American thing, isn't it? America's biggest attempt at music copyright overhaul in decades, also known as the Music Modernization Act, passed unanimously in the Senate Judiciary Committee Thursday, meaning it now only needs to pass a full Senate vote for landing on the president's desk. All right. The Act, a bundle of legislation that chiefly updates licensing and royalty rules for the streaming era, gives royalties to songwriters and artists on songs recorded before 1972 and awards new rights to music producers and mixers, has barreled through Congress in the last few months. Under the MMA, digital distribution services like Apple Music and Spotify would essentially come together with publishers to manage licenses in a more streamlined process. Sounds like it's very much needed for sure. So, good on them. I don't know about the specifics. Obviously, this is all I know about it. Sorry. But sounds like a good thing for sure, because Spotify is really ripping off people right now. So I'm not sure how much longer that could go on before songwriters would, have to roam the streets as homeless people. Clement says, question. By the way, we're reaching the last couple of minutes of this live Q&A. If you have one more question, then ask it right now. We're going to go into a quick fire round. And now, if you have a question, please make it a quick one that can be answered rather quickly. Clement says, question. I play piano. My friend is singing covers, but how can I know what key she's singing in if she's out of key? So in general, she should be able to sing to whatever you're playing. If she's out of key, that means she can't really... I mean, that's her job as a singer, is to be able to sing in key, right? If it's too high for her, then just play everything lower. And typically how I do that is I just go a third lower, and if I'm notice now it's too low, I go up again. So I typically, instead of like going down half steps, I typically go down quite a bit. So a minor third is typically, that's 3 steps, is already quite a lot in terms of range. That can really change a whole lot. And if I notice, oh, this still isn't low enough, I'm going down another third. So I'm going down big steps until I realize, okay, now it's definitely too low, and then I go up stepwise, because it's easier than just saying like, oh, I'm going to go down half a step. Oh, it's still not low enough. Half a step, half a step. It takes you much longer than going down in big chunks, because then at some point you're going to figure out, okay, so I went down a third. This is too low. Before it was too high. So it's got to be one of these two keys in between, right? So it's a really easy way and very quick way to find the right key of the singer. And general rule that I've heard once, that I'm not sure how much that is used in pop music. It's certainly used in choir, in choral arrangements, and in classical music, is to find the highest note that the singer can sing and make that the highest note in your arrangement. Not sure how that applies to pop music. I personally don't think it's a very good rule for that genre, but I just wanted to say it here. Cynthia says, in the learning curve, do you suggest to give priority to the music theory or the ear training? I would say give priority to the writing. Honestly, just write a whole lot. Whenever you have time, just write. That's the most important thing. The ear training is going to take care of itself, and the music theory is going to take care of itself. You might not know the labels for all those things that you're doing, but if you're writing music, you're going to figure out the rules by yourself. And because that's how I did it. I mean, I wrote without music theory for 3 or 4 years, and that's how I really learned how to write songs. I didn't think too much about what am I actually doing. I just wrote. That's the best part, you know. You can learn the rules without actually learning the rules, but you just write and you'll figure it out by yourself. I did some fairly crazy stuff with that as well, you know. I mean, nothing too insane, but I used like an E major in A minor or something like that, you know. Which you know is a major dominant in a minor key, which is super normal if you learn that in school. But if it's just something you figured out just by listening and just by trying different notes together, then that's something that I think is pretty cool, you know. And I figured that out just by myself. I didn't need anyone to tell me that is something that you can do in minor. So what I found is that when I eventually did learn music theory, then all those things that I was already doing, first of all, I had a label for all of them, which is perfect because it allows for better communication with other musicians and songwriters. But also, it just helps you like group everything a little bit better. And it also, and this is probably my favorite thing about learning how to write first before you go into music theory, it gives you perspective. Because a lot of my friends that started with music theory were bad writers because they wanted to write with music theory. They wanted to use it in a creative way, and that's really not what it's for. It's an analysis tool. It's not for creating music. And if you try to write music using music theory, it's typically not going to turn out so great. And it's the same thing with ear training as well. If you've already heard those intervals over and over again, you just didn't have a name for them, it's definitely easier to pick it up after 1 or 2 or 3 years. So just write, listen to what you're doing. And I don't mean like you don't have to know what you're doing. You don't have to be able to figure out, oh, this is a minor 6 that I'm writing here or whatever. Just listen and see like, oh, this kind of sounds like that. Or, I mean, I figured out all these rules just on guitar, So I didn't have to know that this interval here is a minor 6. I just like that sound. And whenever I wanted a dark, kind of sad sound, this is the interval that I used, You don't need to know what that's called. You don't have to know the theoretic background of this interval to be able to appreciate it and to use it in your songs. And I think that's ultimately what gave me a big boost in my writing career, is that I listened to what I was playing and I didn't know what I was playing. I didn't base my assumptions on music on other people, what other people had written in books or talked about in workshops. I based it solely on what I was listening, what I was experiencing as I was playing it. So I highly recommend just write. Don't think about ear training. Don't think about music theory. Really, that's the most important thing, I think. Then after a couple of years, if you really feel comfortable writing some songs, and that I think is the sweet spot. That's when you should start getting into ear training and music theory. And those you can learn pretty much at the same time, because I think they should go hand in hand. When you learn music theory, you should also know. So if you learn about intervals, you also should know what those intervals sound like, and you should be able to identify them, to be able to link that together. Because ear training is really the link between what you know, like what your body knows, what you listen to, and the music theory. That's all that ear training is, right? Being able to call something a minor 6, right? What is that? That's just saying, hey, this is what I'm hearing expressed in music theory. That's all that is. It's just a link between the two. So you can't learn ear training really without the theory, and you can't learn it without having actually written some songs and having a little bit of background in music as well. So, but the music is the most important thing. Really focus on that. That's where all of your time should be going. Anderson the Fourth says, describe Lorde in 3 words. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I would say, and it takes me quite a bit of time actually to come up with my words for the artists on the artist series. So give me a little bit of time. There's something with soul. I'm feeling something with soul, like an old soul or something like that. There's something cold, imperfect about her. I'm sure it's because of the music videos as well, like because they show like these open spaces and these, you know, it's Sweden, this very empty kind of, not a soul around, and then you have this very soulful characters thrown into this emptiness, and that I think creates a really interesting contrast. Yeah, and I think that's what the music plays with as well. So I think emptiness is certainly a big thing in Lorde's music and in her image. I'm not sure about the other two, but yeah, I think that's certainly a big one. Imperfection is certainly something as well. Like playing with expectations, playing with what is expected as a pop musician, something like that. Murad says, do you ever encounter out-of-key chords in pop music? Oh, yeah, sure. There's plenty. I mean, starting with like the oldies like Creep and stuff like that by Radiohead, going all the way to Happy by Pharrell Williams, which has quite a bit of funky chords. We still totally get those. Thomas Wolf says, best advice you've ever gotten. So let's stop with this one. That's a good question. Oh man, I mean the thing is, like, I absorb advice every day, right? I read books, audiobooks, listen to audiobooks, watch YouTube videos about that kind of stuff. It's one of my favorite things in life, is like trying to become a better human being and trying to learn more about the world. So there's so much that I'm absorbing every day. Like, I'm a sponge in that way. I'm really addicted to that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, lately, I can only tell you what it was lately. If you ask me this question again next week, it's going to be a different thing. Actually, this might be a nice feature, saying like best advice of the week, best advice I got this week would be a really nice kind of thing to tie these things here together. So right now, I think it's really the fear or love thing. Like, why are you making your decisions? How are you making your decisions? Is this a decision you're taking out of love, or is it a decision you're taking out of fear? And think about what you're putting into the project when you're making a decision out of fear, as opposed to making it out of love. Do you want to put love into a project or fear? Because people can sense that. So that's it for this week, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you had a good time and learned something. I might not see you next week, because maybe already next week we're going to be on Patreon. I'm not quite sure whether I can actually make it, since I'm going to be traveling a lot this week. We'll see. But guys, take care and stay fit.